So we'll go ahead and solve this one here by completing the square. You need to get your squared turned to be a 1, so we're going to have to divide everything by 4 on both sides. So then we end up with x squared plus a 5x plus a 13/4 is equal to 0. Once again, you want to get your variables right here by themselves, so you got to get rid of that 13/4. Then you're going to want to go ahead and do the half of b squared. B, for this particular problem, is what's in front of your, well, B is always what's in front of your term to the first power. It happens to be a 5. So we'll have this here. So you got to take half of 5, which would be 5 over 2, and then you need to square that. Well, we had our 13 over 4 negative here. Then if we added this right here on the left side, you got to then also make sure you add that on the right side, which is a 25 over 4. Now, remember, when you're completing the square, it's going to factor into two identical parentheses that you could write as one parenthesis all squared. You ask yourself, what's being squared in the beginning, which is an x, so that's why I put an x here. It's always your first sign. And then what was being squared in the end? That's your 5 over 2. You put that in parentheses, all squared. If you wanted to do two parentheses side by side and factor and then get to this step, that would be fine also. On the right-hand side, you add your fractions together, you really get a 12 over 4. 12 over 4 is your 3. So now you want to go ahead and get rid of your squaring by taking your square root. Remember your plus or minus when you take your square root, and then you have to finish solving it for x by subtracting your 5/2. Well, if you do that with this equation right here, which is quadratic, and by the way, any equation that has three terms, two of them with variables, like our triangles, and where the exponent on one of them is double the exponent on the other, it's quadratic. Then you can solve it, and it'll come up with what we refer to as your quadratic formula. Well, here we're going to use our quadratic formula to solve this. To solve whether by factoring or the quadratic formula, you always want to have it set equal to 0. This is a rational equation. You could multiply both sides by your LCD, but since it's one fraction equal to one fraction, you could just cross multiply, taking this denominator times that numerator, and then this denominator times that numerator. So you'd want to FOIL both sides out. Since it's quadratic, you want to set it equal to 0. Collect everything onto one side. A is always what's in front of your squared term. B is always in front of your term to the first power. C is always the one that does not have your variable in it. So we plug that into our quadratic formula, which was at the top of the screen in your notes also. You always go the opposite of B, so it's the opposite of your -3, plus or minus the square root of your B squared. And by the way, the bottom is always 2 times your A. After the B squared in your root, you go minus 4 times your value of A times your value of C. Well, you get a 9 plus a 4 here, which is root 13. 3 plus root 13 over 2. Root 13, 13 is prime, so your root does not simplify, so that ends up being your answer. So we want to use our quadratic formula to solve this, but once again, to solve a quadratic, you want to have it set equal to 0. Sorry about that. So we're going to bring this stuff over to the left side. Notice we're trying to solve it for x. So is this quadratic in terms of x? And the answer is yes. You have an x squared, you have an x to the first, and then you have some stuff that doesn't have x's in it. Well, your a is what's in front of your squared term for your x's. Your b is what your x to the first power is multiplied by, which is a y and a -1. And your c is anything that does not have your variable that you're solving for, which is x. So anything that doesn't have an x, that would be this stuff here. That is your c. So you want to go ahead and plug that into your quadratic formula. You want to go the opposite of your b, so the opposite of a negative y is y, plus or minus your b squared, okay, minus, and once again on the bottom it's 2 times your a value, minus your 4 times your a value, times your c value, and then all you'd want to do is simplify your root. So you get a y squared, that's a negative 8, so you'd want to multiply that negative 8 through into your parentheses. Oh, you get a y squared plus a 24y squared, so that's your 25y squared. You get your negative 8 times your negative 1, which is your plus 8. Now, you're not able to apply the root to each one of these because there's a plus sign in the inside. So we have to leave it as is and stop. But keep in mind, sometimes your roots will simplify. If we had something like this, totally separate problem here, this is your answer. But if you had something like this here, you could go ahead and pull out your common factor, which is a 4. Now, since you have it written as two things multiplied together in your root, your 4 times the parentheses, you could apply the root to each one. Apply your root to the 4, apply your root to the parentheses. Your root of your 4 simplifies. Your root of your parentheses you can't do anything with because there's a plus sign here. And so then sometimes your roots do simplify. Well, we're going to solve this one here. This one also happens to be quadratic. Notice you have something squared plus that same thing to the first power plus something that doesn't have it. So in the context of quadratic equations, we're solving it for the box here always. You're always solving it for your thing to the first power, which in this case is your x plus 2. So you're going to go x plus 2 is equal to, and then your quadratic formula. Remember, your a is always what's in front of your squared term, which in this case is a 5. Your b is always what's in front of your term to the first power, which is your negative 4. And your c is always the stuff that doesn't have your variable. Well, we plug that in then to our quadratic formula, the opposite of b plus or minus your b squared minus 4 times a times c all over your 2 times your a. So you get a 16 minus a negative 140 all over a 10, which is the square root of a 156, because you remember minus minus is plus plus. So we need to simplify our root 156. That's a 4 times 39. So you can take the square root of your 4, the square root of the 39. The square root of the 4 you know is your 2. So we really get our x plus 2 equaling our 4 plus or minus a 2 root 39 all over 10. Now the bottom is even. Notice you have a 2 you can pull out of the top as a common factor. Now you have 2 times the whole top, 2 times the whole bottom. Your 2's in front here end up dropping, leaving you with only what was in the parentheses over your 5. Now you need to finish getting x by itself, so you'd want to go ahead and subtract 2. And we get this. Now if you did want to go ahead, write this as 2 over 1, find your common denominator, which is 5. Get a 5 on the bottom. Your negative 2 times your 5 is a negative 10, plus your 2 is a negative 8. Then you could go plus or minus, and you could put your root. Leaving it like this here is fine, or leaving it like what we had over here without my handwritten in would also be fine.